When I found out that Fiji was an island far away and it would be 5 years, I did not want to be so far from my family for so long. I explained that I had changed my mind, but instead of letting me go, they locked me in a room with no food and water.
That's My Fate, part of Nadia Freeman's The Girmit. It takes us back to a time between 1879 and 1916 when more than 60,000 people were transferred from India to Fiji by the British to work on sugarcane plantations as indentured labourers. They came to be known as Girmitias and today make up over 32% of the Fijian population. 15,000 of their descendants today live in New Zealand, and Nadia Freeman is one of those descendants. She's a poet, a performer, electronica musician, and a theatre producer, and she's about to stage the Girmit in Wellington, Porirua and Nelson as part of their fringe festivals, and she joins us now. Kia ora, Nadia.
Kia ora, what a wonderful introduction. Thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure. It's a wonderful show. On that track we heard My Fate. Who do we hear speaking in that?
So that's actually recordings from various people. You've got Jilla, so Joseph, Shamshad, and my uncle John, who I recorded his voice about 2 weeks after he'd returned from hospital from brain surgery. So, but he was so committed to wanting to do the recordings. So I very much appreciate his commitment to being a part of the show with me. Yeah.
Tell me about this title, The Girmit, or the Girmitias? How do I pronounce this?
Girmit. So that was the way people pronounce the word agreement. So it's
so it's like a transliteration.
Yeah, and it's become an identifying part of this diaspora. So I guess that the fact that when they signed that agreement, they signed away their life effectively to a new world that they weren't anticipating. So I don't know if I've ever heard of a whole culture of people sort of connected to the idea of a contract.
Wow.
So that's where the word Girmit comes from.
So tell us a bit more about this contract and how so many Indian migrants came to Fiji.
Yeah, so, and this is one thing that my show explores, all the many different ways that the people of that time ended up coming to Fiji. There was a lot of deception, there was a lot of coercion, and sometimes very basically kidnapping. So on the lighter side of it, you had people who were suffering from famine and real hardship in India, and they saw an opportunity to make money and send it home. And then on the other end of it, you had people who were lost, told that they could be helped, taken into a depot and provided with food and accommodation, and then told that they needed to pay off their debt, and then were forced to sign up to labour. But all of them were under the interpretation that they were going somewhere in India or 30 minutes from India.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
They didn't know they were going to the Pacific Ocean.
No. So, and that's like a really big part of the story of.
Oh my goodness.
Many have never been on a boat before, and they certainly wouldn't. So for some that was exciting, some of it was terrifying. And then when they realised they would be on that boat for months, was a whole other sort of feat to go through. And with the Girmitias, they were signed up to a 5-year contract, and at the end of the 5 years, if they could save enough money, they could pay for their fare back home. But the way the wages were set up, which wasn't really wages at all, and the way their food stipends were managed, which was never enough, so that they would have to spend any money they had on food. Most couldn't afford to actually return home after 5 years, so then they would have to do 10 years. Then conveniently in 10 years, there just weren't enough ships to take them home.
What an agreement!
Yeah. So that's why many stayed on. But then also some, after 10 years of being somewhere,
yes,
going home could seem like another whole feat that you might not want to do.
So 32% of the Fijian population today, obviously, the settled became a major part of the population, just as Pākehā have in New Zealand, right?
Yeah.
Your this is your descendants. Have you grown up knowing about this story?
No, not at all. It was actually a shock for me. I think my mother always talked about how she grew up on a sugarcane farm and that it was something that had been in their family, and it was just really precarious information about who owned the farm, what was happening, why they came over. And I decided to do some research, and it was actually really hard to find information. There were, I think there's more now actually. Wellington Public Library have ordered a few more, but at the time I could only find one book by Rajan Prasad, Tears in Paradise. And then I went to the National Library, which is why I'm performing at the National Library, where I found a few more resources. And even then, we're talking, I can't say off the top of my head, but 20 to 40 resources, in total.
Wow.
about this topic. So, and it was through that I found out that, hey, actually my family didn't come for a chance of a better life. They didn't come for this sort of opportunity. It was really a burden. And I knew that the work they would be under was very hard and a difficult life, but I hadn't realised it was, as Bridge Lyle says, it was just slavery rebranded.
Have you managed to trace back your descendants through to when they came over to Fiji?
Yeah, I've had some relatives who did that work for me. The Fiji Archives and actually National Library also have the immigration passes that people can find online, and they can find that pass that belonged to their family member and the boat they were on. So we know the town we're from and when we came. And
was it your mother who emigrated?
Yes, my mum came to New Zealand in 1976 to marry my father, a Lower Hutt resident.
So did you grow up surrounded by your Indian culture, or was there a slight jump?
As like someone who's bicultural, it's always an interesting conversation when we all have different experiences. So I had some family growing up, and then they all moved to warmer climates. I don't know what they're talking about. New Zealand's balmy. So I had a bit of. I did have some of my cultural identity, but not enough, I think. I don't speak Hindi, despite many attempts to try, and I felt like telling the story was an opportunity to get closer.
I think I hear you singing in Hindi at one point. Is that right?
That is not me. That is actually Harsha Prasad, who's going to be joining me for these performances. She's a beautiful singer.
Magic.
Yeah, so I'm really, really blessed to have her as part of the show.
I said Indian before, but we are talking Fijian Indian. I see one of the really interesting things that's very current at the moment is Fijian Indians and how that's recognised. I think last year Fiji's Prime Minister, Rabuka, made it clear that he considers Fijians of Indian descent Fijian, and yet here they're not classified. You're not classified as specific people, I understand.
Yeah, and it's like I think it's a continuous conversation that I feel like might always be a conversation. We're not Indigenous to Fiji, but we're also no longer Indian. Like, while we have taken some of our Indian cultural practices, we've absorbed some of Fijian culture. Yeah. We're also not immigrants by choice. And I think that's where it's really important to sort of be identified as our own group. And also when you think about health statistics and policy, I think it's really important that Fijian Indians aren't categorised as Asian in all aspects, particularly when you look at Fijian Indians' rates of cardiovascular disease and rates of diabetes, and even I have some other work that I do in domestic violence, and you look at domestic violence numbers. These are all more reflective of Pacific, exposure to famines, exposure to starvation, and those have an impact on future generations and what we're coping with.
Well, it's just interesting for me thinking about New Zealand Europeans. That's what I would put down on my census thing. Yeah. I'm a New Zealand European, or actually I was British born, but most of my friends would put New Zealand European as Pākehā, and yet you don't have that option in a sense, right? Yeah, I think the census form now allows Fijian Indian, but it hasn't been that long, and we don't know how many of us are actually in New Zealand because for so long, and some might not, just like some people pick New Zealand European, some people pick Pākehā, and some people don't choose to pick any of that. I don't know if every Fijian Indian would
would tick that box, or whether some would tick Fijian or some might tick Indian, depending on how they relate to their culture.
What are the Fijian aspects of the culture then that you bring forward?
Kava. It's part of socialization ceremony, and it had been adapted into some of spiritual practices. Food. We have some food like I really enjoy making bara, which is, I guess, like a spicy falafel. That is, I haven't seen in Indian food groups yet, although like there are similar things like pakora, and we make something that we call gugula, which actually I've been told by my Samoan friends is just banakeke. So we have just things like that as a start, and even music is slightly adapted, things like that. Yeah.
And how is this kind of reflected in your show, Nadia?
Yeah, well, I have. I'm not sure if I have entirely succeeded, but I'm always working on it. But I think this particular presentation really does it. So here I am, second generation New Zealander. I don't play traditional instruments. I am an electronic music artist. So I've interpreted the story the way I know how, which is through electronic music and English. But I'm playing with Harsha, who is a tabla performer and who sings in Fiji Bhat and Hindi. And so I think together we're sort of demonstrating that our diaspora and our cultural identity.
I know with electronic music, one of the things I love about electronic music is how it can bring so many cultural layers together, right?
Yeah, there's no rules.
And I'm listening to some of your work is misleading on Bandcamp. There's drum and bass, there's techno, there's pop. It kind of keeps on changing. You can bring all these different flavours in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I probably am terrible for not sticking to one thing as well. But I just love a lot of types of music. So yeah.
Tell us about the show. How do you tell the story?
I use a mix of, so I have recorded narrations that you would have heard in the music before that are interspersed without the show to tell that story as if it were a first-hand account of the different voices of the people who came. And I take you through, I guess, the emotion of that through music. Without spoiling all surprises, yeah, I think that's really it. It's music, it's narration, and then I also have some moments of poetry.
And what's the response been to the work? This distinct community, which is quite large in New Zealand, really, the Fijian Indian community.
Yeah.
Have they responded well to this, or is it kind of strange to them?
They have been so wonderful, and I wasn't sure when I first performed it, especially being not born in Fiji, whether it would be received well, but they've been so supportive and so happy to have their story told, because so many New Zealanders don't know it, and actually so many of our own people don't know it. So I think we just, and now I'm more embedded in the community, it's any way the story can be shown, which is why I helped curate an exhibition in Otara with 3 other visual artists, one doing VR, one doing textiles, another painting, and we just keep continuing to find different ways to tell the story so that different audiences can hear it. And it's beautiful. And also the people I know who are not part of that community have responded so well, almost coming to me with a shame, saying, sorry, I didn't know, but I don't think anyone needs to feel sorry about it. No one's educating anyone about the story.
You didn't know, right?
I didn't know. So I'm just so grateful when people come and take a chance to learn about it.
And that exhibition was at the Fresh Gallery, I think, in South Auckland.
Yes. Yeah.
Sounded fabulous. Are we going to see that again sometime, do you think?
I'm not sure. Nothing's on the plan yet, but I think those artists, Seema Singh, Shivani and Padma Naidu, they're all artists who are continuing to exhibit around New Zealand, and they have become quite close friends, so I wouldn't be surprised if you're going to see that exhibit again. Yeah. It's actually still on in Otara until the 8th of March if people still want to see it.
Oh, fabulous. Yeah. It's still on.
Yes, yeah. It's called Hidden Inheritance in Otara.
That is wonderful. Nadia, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And as part of New Zealand Fringe, Nadia's show, The Girmit, is at the National Library in Pornicky, Wellington this coming Thursday, Pātaka Porirua on Friday, then at the Nelson Fringe on the 6th and 7th of March. And there's also a new local documentary out, Girmit, The Fields of Sadness. It's getting screenings nationally in Auckland, Hamilton and Christchurch this coming Friday to Sunday. We hear it's terrific. And you can also hear more about the story behind The Girmit this week on the RNZ podcast, Here Now.